In 7 days, a trade deal worth $2.7 trillion either survives or begins to die. That's not a headline. That's not an exaggeration. That's a number. $2.7 trillion every single year, flowing between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Through factories in Ontario and Michigan, through farms in Alberta and Iowa, through pipelines that cross the border every hour of every day, through ports that never sleep, through supply chains so deeply intertwined that separating them would be like trying to unscramble an egg. And on July 1st, 2026, 7 days from today, all three countries sit down at a table, virtual or otherwise, to decide whether that deal has a future. But here's what the headlines are missing. Here's what the 30-second news clips aren't explaining. Here's what you need to understand before that meeting happens, because once it does, the story moves fast, and if you don't have the context, you will not understand what you're seeing. The man who signed that deal, Donald Trump, just told the world he doesn't want to renew it. Standing in front of reporters, he said, and I'm quoting him directly, "I would rather leave it unsigned. I'd rather have it terminated." And Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, the man whose entire economy depends on what happens at that table, looked at the cameras and shrugged. Not figuratively, literally, he shrugged, made a calm, measured statement, and walked away. So the question burning through every trading floor, every boardroom, every small business owner's mind from Vancouver to Windsor right now is this: is Mark Carney the coolest head in the room, or is he the most dangerous gambler in North America? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what CUSMA actually is and why it matters beyond the talking points, what Trump is actually doing when he threatens to tear it up, what Carney is actually betting on when he refuses to panic, the forces inside the United States that Trump is ignoring at his own political peril, and the three scenarios, ranging from relief to catastrophe, that could unfold starting 1 week from today. This is the story nobody is telling you completely. Let's tell it. To understand what's at stake on July 1st, you first have to understand what CUSMA actually is. Not the political talking points, not the campaign rhetoric, but the actual mechanics of a deal that quietly shapes the daily life of hundreds of millions of people across North America. CUSMA, the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, replaced NAFTA in 2020. And here's the first thing you need to know. The man now threatening to tear it up is the same man who negotiated it, Donald Trump, in his first term. He didn't inherit CUSMA from a previous administration. He built it. He chose it. He stood at a signing ceremony in January 2020 and called it, again, I'm quoting him directly, the largest, fairest, most balanced, and modern trade agreement ever achieved. There's never been anything like it. There's never been anything like it. Those were his words 6 years ago about a deal he now says he wants terminated. So what changed? That's the question worth asking, because the answer tells you almost everything about what's really happening right now. What changed is leverage, or more precisely, Trump's belief about who has it. In 2020, Trump needed a win. NAFTA had been the target of his criticism for decades. Replacing it with something he could brand as his own, something called CUSMA instead of NAFTA, was a political victory he could sell to his base. So he negotiated hard, extracted concessions from Canada and Mexico, and signed a deal he was proud of. In 2026, Trump believes the leverage has shifted. The United States is the largest economy in North America by an enormous margin. Canada and Mexico need access to the American market far more than America needs access to theirs. At least that's Trump's view. He believes that threatening to walk away from CUSMA puts him in the strongest possible negotiating position, allowing him to extract even more concessions in a renegotiated version of the deal. That is the strategic logic. Whether it's correct, and we'll get to why many experts think it isn't, is the central question of the next 7 days. Now let's talk about what CUSMA actually does, because the $2.7 trillion number means nothing without context. CUSMA governs almost every category of trade between the three countries. It sets rules for automotive manufacturing, specifying how much of a vehicle's content must be produced within North America to qualify for zero tariffs. It governs agriculture, dairy, beef, grains, produce. It covers energy, oil, natural gas, electricity. It establishes rules for digital trade, intellectual property, and labor standards. And critically, it includes a dispute resolution mechanism that allows companies and governments to challenge tariffs and trade practices in front of independent panels. That dispute resolution system is one of the reasons Canada fought so hard to keep it when Trump first proposed changes in his first term. Without it, Canada has no formal mechanism to challenge American trade actions. Every dispute becomes purely political. And in a purely political contest between a small country and the world's largest economy, the small country loses. Which is precisely why the threat to terminate CUSMA is so significant. It's not just about tariff rates, it's about whether Canada has any rules-based system to protect itself, or whether it's simply at the mercy of whatever Washington decides on any given day. Now let's get to the timeline, because the sequence of events leading to July 1st is not random. It tells a very specific story about how this confrontation was engineered. Go back to February 2026. The United States Supreme Court issues a landmark ruling in a case called Learning Resources, Inc. versus Trump. The court strikes down the tariffs Trump had been imposing under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA. These were the tariffs that had been hitting Canada with a 25 to 35% surcharge on non-CUSMA goods. Gone. Ruled unconstitutional. For a moment, Canada exhaled. Then, within 4 days, the Trump administration pivoted to Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, a law so obscure that most trade lawyers had to look it up. A law that allowed the president to impose a temporary global tariff surcharge of up to 15% on all imports worldwide without needing a national security threat. Trump used it immediately, setting it at 10% and then raising it to 15%. The key word is temporary. Section 122 tariffs expire after 150 days by law. That clock started ticking in February, which means it runs out on July 24th.
Then, in March 2026, the U.S. Trade Representative launched 60 simultaneous investigations into countries, including Canada, for failing to stop goods produced with forced labor from entering their supply chains. The proposed penalty? A 10% tariff that, unlike the Section 122 surcharge, could be permanent. We covered that story in our last video. Check it out if you haven't. Then, on June 10th, Trump told reporters he was not looking to renew CUSMA. On June 17th, he said he'd rather see it terminated, but then added he might sign it. And on June 18th, Mexico's economy secretary confirmed that a trilateral virtual meeting is scheduled for July 1st. Look at that timeline from a distance, and something becomes clear. Every major pressure tool is converging on the same window. The Section 122 tariffs expired July 24th. The forced labor investigation concludes around July 1st. The CUSMA review is July 1st. And Trump has just publicly declared he doesn't want to renew the deal, exactly 1 week before all of it lands at once. This is not coincidence. This is a coordinated pressure campaign designed to bring Canada to the table under maximum stress, with maximum leverage stacked against it at a single moment in time. Force a decision, force concessions, or force collapse. The question is whether it's working. Let's talk about Mark Carney, because his response to all of this has been so deliberately measured, so strategically quiet, that it deserves its own deep analysis. When Trump said CUSMA was terminated, Carney's response was one sentence. It's no secret the president, in recent years, has not been the biggest fan of CUSMA or other trade deals. That's it. One sentence, then silence. No emergency press conference, no angry statement, no leaked diplomatic cable signaling outrage, just a calm acknowledgement that yes, everyone already knew Trump had a complicated relationship with trade deals, and then Carney went back to his other meetings. To understand why Carney is doing this, you need to understand his background. Before he was Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney was the Governor of the Bank of Canada during the 2008 financial crisis. Then he was the Governor of the Bank of England during Brexit. He spent his career in rooms where panic is contagious, and one wrong word can move market by billions of dollars. He knows better than almost anyone alive what it looks like when a leader panics under pressure, and he knows what it costs. So he doesn't do it. Not publicly, not visibly. But here's the deeper strategic logic behind his silence, and this is what most analysts are not saying clearly enough. Carney is not staying quiet because he has nothing to say. He's staying quiet because panic would be the most expensive thing he could do right now. Think about it from Trump's perspective. Trump's pressure campaign only works if Canada is desperate. If Canada comes to the table visibly anxious, Trump knows he can extract maximum concessions on dairy, on digital services, on automotive content, on whatever else is on his list. The more desperate Canada looks, the worse the deal Canada gets. But if Canada stays calm, if Carney shrugs, if the premiers stay measured, if the markets don't completely collapse, then Trump's leverage is diminished. Because what Trump needs, just as much as Canada needs this deal, is a win he can sell. A dramatic turnaround where Canada came to its senses and gave the U.S. what it wanted. If Canada doesn't panic, that story doesn't write itself. And Carney has something else working in his favor, something Trump keeps overlooking or choosing to ignore. CUSMA is not just good for Canada. For huge swaths of the American economy, CUSMA is essential, and the evidence was on public display at the exact moment Trump was threatening to walk away from the deal. On the same day Trump was telling reporters in the Oval Office that he wasn't looking to renew CUSMA, key leaders of the American agricultural industry were on Capitol Hill doing the opposite. They were praising the deal, calling for its extension, warning that losing access to Canadian and Mexican markets would devastate American farmers. The association representing General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, three of the most politically powerful companies in the United States, with factories in states that Trump needs to win, issued a statement calling CUSMA the most vital trade agreement for American automakers. Not one of the most vital, the most vital, and they urged the Trump administration to preserve it. The National Association of Manufacturers said CUSMA is essential to American industry. U.S. agriculture groups launched a formal campaign backing the deal. These aren't liberal think tanks or Canadian lobbying groups. These are the core constituencies of the Republican Party, Trump's own voters, the people whose jobs and incomes depend on what happens in that room on July 1st. And then there's the economic context that makes Trump's position even more politically precarious. In May 2026, U.S. inflation hit 4.2%, the highest it has been in 3 years. The cost of living for ordinary Americans, the people Trump promised to help, is going up, not down. And Trump's tariff policies are a significant part of why. When you put 50% tariffs on Canadian steel, American factories that use steel pay more. When you put tariffs on Canadian lumber, American homes cost more to build. When you disrupt supply chains that took decades to integrate, prices go up everywhere. Trump's approval rating is averaging below 40%. Congressional Republicans are quietly terrified about the November midterms. They know that if prices keep rising and trade chaos keeps spreading, they will pay the political price. Tearing up CUSMA in this environment, actually triggering a formal withdrawal, would send prices higher still. There is no credible economic research that says it would make things cheaper for American consumers. The research says the opposite. Every major economic model of a CUSMA collapse projects significant GDP losses for all three countries, but particularly for sectors of the American economy that are deeply integrated with Canada and Mexico. This is Carney's bet. Not that Trump will be reasonable, not that Trump cares about Canadian feelings or Canadian jobs or the long history of the two countries' relationship, but that Trump is self-interested, that the political cost of actually destroying CUSMA, not threatening to destroy it, but actually doing it, is too high, even for this president, even now. The shrug is a calculated message. Do your worst, because you both know you won't. But here's where the danger lives, because Carney's bet, as logical as it is, carries real risk. And the risk is this: Trump is unpredictable. Not randomly unpredictable, strategically unpredictable. His documented approach to negotiation is to do things that seem irrational in the short term because the long-term pain they create forces the other side to capitulate. He has done this before, repeatedly, in this very trade war. A 50% tariff on Canadian steel seemed irrational, and it happened. A Supreme Court ruling striking down presidential tariff authority seemed like a permanent victory for Canada, and Trump found another weapon within 4 days. The forced labor investigation targeting Canada seemed absurd, and it's now on track to produce permanent tariffs. In this trade war, things that seemed impossible have happened on a regular basis, which means the three scenarios we're about to walk through are not academic. Any one of them could be July 1st's reality.
Scenario 1 is the managed extension. This is what most trade lawyers and economists who have read the actual text of CUSMA believe is most likely to happen. Trump doesn't formally withdraw. No 6 months' notice is served. Instead, the three countries signal at the July 1st meeting that they want to continue negotiations, but under a different framework. Annual reviews, not the 16-year extension Canada wants. A process that keeps the deal alive but forces renegotiation of specific terms over the next 12 to 18 months. Markets would exhale in this scenario. The Canadian dollar would stabilize or recover. Business investment, frozen for months, would begin to unfreeze. Not because everything is resolved, it wouldn't be, but because the immediate catastrophic risk would be taken off the table. But even in this best-case scenario, Canada doesn't walk away clean. Because the U.S. Trade Representative has said repeatedly, publicly, clearly, tariffs are a new reality. Steel and aluminum at 50%, automobiles at 25%, lumber at 45%. Even with CUSMA extended, those tariffs don't automatically disappear. Canada would still be fighting for relief on every one of those sectors in separate negotiations against an administration that has consistently said tariffs are the price of access to the American market. A managed extension buys time. It does not buy resolution. Scenario 2 is the pressure escalation. In this scenario, the July 1st meeting ends without a clear outcome. No agreement on extension, no formal withdrawal notice, just ambiguity, silence, a statement that talks will continue without a timeline. Markets would not take this well. In a context where Canadian businesses have been operating under tariff uncertainty for over a year, where the economy has already entered a technical recession, 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, another dose of unresolved uncertainty could push things significantly worse. The Canadian dollar would likely fall, Canadian equities would drop, business investment would freeze further, and most dangerously, the political pressure on Carney to give Trump something, anything to get clarity would become immense. This is the scenario where Carney's silence becomes a political liability rather than a strategic asset, because when ordinary Canadians are feeling the pain in their wallets and their jobs, and the Prime Minister's response is a shrug, the question becomes, are you cool under pressure, or are you not fighting for us? In this scenario, Trump would likely use the pressure building in Canada to extract new concessions on dairy market access, on digital services policy, on automotive content rules, on any of the other items that have been on Washington's list throughout these negotiations. Canada would eventually give something to get the deal back on track, and Trump would call it a victory. The question is how much Canada gives and whether what it gets in return, tariff relief, a clear extension of CUSMA, is worth the price. Scenario 3 is the one nobody wants to say out loud, but it's real and you need to understand it. Trump serves written notice of withdrawal from CUSMA. Under the text of the agreement, any of the 3 countries can withdraw by giving 6 months written notice to the other 2. 6 months from July 1st is January 1st, 2027, the beginning of a new calendar year, right at the heart of the American midterm election campaign season. Most analysts think this is unlikely. The political cost is too high. The economic damage to American farmers, automakers, and manufacturers would be immediate and visible. The backlash from Trump's own constituencies would be severe, and Trump himself seemed to leave the door open to signing some kind of renewal when he said, "I may sign it." But here's the thing about unlikely. A year and a half ago, a 50% tariff on Canadian steel was unlikely. A Supreme Court ruling striking down presidential tariff powers was unlikely. A forced labor investigation targeting Canada was unlikely. An inflation rate of 4.2% in the United States was unlikely.
In this trade war, unlikely has happened repeatedly, and if scenario 3 becomes reality, if that 6-month countdown clock starts ticking on July 1st, the consequences are severe and immediate. There would be no more CUSMA exemptions protecting the majority of Canadian exports from tariffs. There would be no more rules-based dispute resolution mechanism for Canada to challenge American trade actions. Every sector of the Canadian economy that has been shielded by CUSMA, from automotive to agriculture to energy, would be exposed to whatever tariff level Washington decides to impose. The Canadian dollar would fall sharply. Canadian businesses that have been adapting to the trade war would face a completely different reality, and the negotiations that would follow to potentially re-enter some new trade arrangement would happen from the weakest position Canada has been in since before NAFTA was signed in 1994. This is the scenario Carney is betting against. This is the cliff edge that his quiet confidence is designed to prevent. And this is why every piece of news coming out of Ottawa and Washington over the next 7 days matters. So what do you watch? What are the signals that tell you which scenario is unfolding? Watch the U.S. letter. Canada sent its letter on June 2nd, formally stating it wants CUSMA renewed for 16 years. Mexico sent its letter as well. The United States gave Canada a letter on June 4th, but its contents have not been made public. The language in that letter, when it eventually becomes known, will tell you exactly where Washington's intentions actually lie. A vague letter is a bad sign. A letter that acknowledges the value of CUSMA and signals willingness to renegotiate is a good sign. Watch for leaks.
Watch Carney's calendar and his tone. A prime minister who believes the deal is in good shape makes his normal public appearances. He talks about other issues. He looks relaxed. A prime minister who believes the deal is in danger starts making calls to premiers. He cancels other engagements. He holds emergency meetings. Watch what Carney does, not just what he says, because the shrug, as we've discussed, is part of the strategy. His schedule will tell you more than his statements. Watch the Canadian dollar. The loonie is your real-time barometer. Currency traders read 200-page trade documents for a living, and they price risk into the exchange rate every hour of every trading day. In the 48 hours before July 1st, watch the Canadian dollar against the US dollar. A sharp drop tells you the market is pricing in a bad outcome. Stability, or a slight rise, tells you traders see a managed extension coming. Watch the agricultural lobby in Washington. If the American Farm Bureau, the National Association of Manufacturers, and the auto industry start making more noise in the days before July 1st, calling on Trump not to walk away, that's a sign that the business community believes the threat is real and is trying to stop it. Silence from these groups means they believe the deal is fine. Urgency from them means they know something the public doesn't. And watch July 1st itself. The trilateral virtual meeting is confirmed. What comes out of it, the language of the joint statement, if there is one, the tone of each country's reaction, what Carney says in the first press conference after, that is the moment. Everything before it is preparation. Everything after it is consequence. Here is where we stand, right now, on June 24, 2026. CUSMA covers $2.7 trillion in annual trade. Trump signed it. Trump now says he wants it terminated. His own industries say they need it. His own political survival may depend on not destroying it. But his strategic logic says threatening to destroy it is the best way to get what he wants from it. Carney has chosen silence over panic, patience over concession, the shrug over the emergency press conference. He is betting that Trump's self-interest will ultimately outweigh his instinct for disruption, that the American farmers and automakers and manufacturers who need this deal will make their voices heard, that the inflation numbers and the approval ratings will give Trump's own party a reason to pull him back from the edge. It is a rational bet. It may be the right bet, but it is still a bet. And the stakes are the economic foundation of an entire country. The next 7 days will tell us whether the steadiest free trade relationship in the world gets extended, renegotiated, or placed on a countdown to collapse.
We will be here every step of the way, breaking it down, cutting through the noise, showing you what's actually happening. Not the headline, not the tweet, not the 30-second clip, but the real story. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what's at stake between Canada and the United States, give it a like. It helps this channel reach more people who want understanding, not just information. Subscribe to Conflict Lens, because in a world where every headline feels like a crisis and every crisis feels the same, you deserve a lens that helps you see the difference. On July 1st, we'll be back with what happened, with what it means, and with what comes next. I'll see you then.